Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Thinking. I'm Matt Dancona. I'm an editor here in Tortoise. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to tonight's Thinking because it really is a special one. It brings together two very important and inspiring authors, and I gather online friends. So it's nice to, friends reunited, to talk about their lives, their writing. And also, in my opinion, the affinity that some of the themes that they're trying to address in their respective books possess. So there are affinities there. Before I forget, both of these excellent books are available this evening for the Tortoise bargain price of £10 a throw. Signed. You cannot beat that. So don't say we don't treat you nicely. And honestly, they are both wonderful. Kit de Waal is an award-winning novelist. My Name is Leon, one of my favourite novels of recent years. But she's also, for my money, one of the really great short story form writers of our time. She's the V.S. Pritchett of the 2020s. I mean, she really is amazing. So don't miss out on the short stories if you haven't read them before. But she's now written a memoir called Without Warning and Only Sometimes, which is a fascinating turn into her own life, and we will discuss that. Adam Kay is a writer, comedian, musician, a one day at a time recovering obstetrician and gynecologist, whose phenomenal book, this is going to hurt, lifted the lid on the 97-hour-a-week life of the junior doctor and really became a phenomenon, turned into a very successful TV series with Ben Whishaw, and has sold, I think, more than 2.5 million copies already. And his latest book, seen here sitting on its Odeon Lux podium, is called Undoctored, the story of a medic who ran out on his patients. And it takes forward the tale in ways that are fascinating, lateral, take us back and forth in time, and explore, if you like, what it's like to go through the checkpoint Charlie from the nation of medicine to the nation of everything else. And there's a lot to discuss in both the books. So, Adam, can I start with you? One of the kind of most resonant sentences in the book, which in a way, it leapt out of the book for me, was you're allowed to press the reset button. As a way into the book, can you talk about that a little?
So I guess Undoctored is both a prequel and a sequel to This Is Gonna Hurt, my first book. It talks about what medical school is like, how people are chosen to be doctors, how they're trained to be doctors, and also, are we allowed to say fuck? And also,
it's too late for that. But
yes. I thought I should check before doing anything. I should. And how basically this process and how medicine as a career fucks you up. And there's I guess something that our books have in common is you become a member of a religion with quite specific rules, and religions don't like you leaving. And medicine has got all the hallmarks of a cult, and it's very hard to leave, and it's very hard to press that button. But I talk about how I attempted to, and how how life looks now, and how I'm trying to undo some of the damage I think I did to myself and others did to me, and also think about how we can improve things in future so you can participate in the NHS, which is, I think, the most amazing, wonderful thing, our greatest achievement as a society, but without doing damage to yourself.
It's interesting in the book, you talk a lot about the burden of expectations, not least your own, that form a career. I think for all of us, really. And then if you decide to take a different path from those early formative expectations, there is a sort of there is a long tail of guilt and uncertainty and insecurity. And I wonder. It seems to me this is particularly because we're moving to a world where people are going to live longer and longer. This whole idea that you impress upon young people when they are barely babies, they're 11, 12, that this is what you should do. This is what you must do. This is, if you don't do this, your life will be a disaster. A totally binary kind of choice. Are we actually letting them down in some way?
I would say so. I imagine there are some people who absolutely know what they want to do, and that's come from the right place.
That's a vocation, though, isn't it?
I don't think it's possible to know that you want to be a doctor when you see your careers advisor, when you choose the A-levels that the universities want you to have as a teenager. I just think you can like the idea of it, or you can like Holby City, and you can like all sorts of different things, but I don't think you can understand what the job actually involves. And I've thought for a long time that we're choosing doctors the wrong way, but also I think we're choosing them at the wrong age. So I'm not going to start advocating for anything else in the American healthcare system, which I think is absolutely abhorrent for the most part. But their medical students are generally postgraduates. So, and there's a big difference between being a 16-year-old choosing your A-levels or higher and being someone who's 21 you've left home, you've maybe had a relationship of some sort, you've maybe had to earn some money for yourself. And I think at that point, you've got much more of a chance of, you've got a sort of a wider angle on the world. And I think you're much more likely to know if medicine's the job for you at that point.
You talk about the role of humour in your, not just as now what you do, and you're fantastically gifted comic writer, but you talk about it as your armour and as a weakness as well, and which is very interesting because I think that's a very subtle insight into what humour is, and I wondered if you could elaborate on that a little.
So, at medical school, and then when you work as a doctor, you're not taught how to cope. You're taught how to break bad news to someone, but never once the impact that has on you as a person. And there's a bit in the book where I have to go back to my GCSE physics and say that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's never equal what comes back to you as a healthcare professional, but there's always some opposite reaction. And you're not taught how to cope, so you find your own ways. And I've got both of my ways on stage with me at the moment. I've got writing stuff down and relatively cheap white wine. And they both work to a certain extent, and they can give you a buffer for certain situations, but they're not enough. And it's a profession that almost, I would say, deliberately doesn't encourage speaking to other people and taking time out and admitting you're human, because you're a bloody doctor and you bloody get on with it. And you're almost encouraged to think of yourself as other or superhuman, but you're not. You're just an idiot 16-year-old who decided on those A-levels, and you've now got a stethoscope and you now do an important, vital role, but you're still human, and you are someone who gets stuff wrong and gets sick and gets sad, but there needs to be a culture shift so that we acknowledge that. And there's a lot of talk about well-being at the moment within the NHS, and it's a necessary chat, particularly off the back of COVID, but it needs to go deep and it needs to address this stuff, because if you actually look into it, it tends to mean they've just started a Zumba class.
Yes, which is intrinsically good, though not necessarily
it's not quite
the answer.
enough.
No, it won't do the job on its own. Much more of that on Adam, thank you. I want to turn to Kit, and again, there are such fascinating points of contact between the two books, because the book is about your upbringing and your move into early adulthood. Tell us a little bit about, there's a sort of trilocational story going on in your background. Tell us about that.
I was born in Birmingham. You'd never guess that from the accent. I was born in Birmingham in 1960. My mother is from Wexford in Ireland. My father's from St. Kitts in the Caribbean. And my mother became a Jehovah's Witness, and she became a Jehovah's Witness when I was 6. And that is a cult. And everything you speak about, not about being in, and if you're in, but you can't leave. It's hard to leave. It's embarrassing, it's shameful to leave. So we had that shit going on. And my parents didn't get on at all. They operated as 2 separate people. My father came to the UK for 5 years, and he came for 5 years. I'll make some money, I'll go home. That was the plan.
This was to St. Kitts, yeah?
Sorry?
To St. Kitts,
To St. Kitts, yeah. Yes. That's what he called. He'd never call England home or our house home. Home was away. And so what you don't do, if that's your plan, is meet an Irish woman that doesn't believe in birth control. And so within 7 years, he's got 5 kids. And he was disappointed about that, although obviously he's shagging my mum, so consequences. So he was just like still waiting to go home, Meanwhile, my mother, who would have had 20 children, becomes a Jehovah's Witness. So she's waiting for her paradise. And her paradise is when Jehovah brings Armageddon and kills all the bad people, including all of our cousins, all of our friends, everybody that isn't a Jehovah's Witness, which is most of the world. And
It's quite a major operation.
It's quite a major thing.
Yeah.
But we were brought up with that and we believed it.
Yeah.
And everybody bad was going to die. And that, of course, included me. I like boys. I've had a fag by the time I'm 10. I stole money out of my dad's trouser pocket. So I was going to die. And so I was brought up to think, because Armageddon was going to come in 1975, I would have been 15. And so I believed I would never leave school, never have children, nothing. I was going to die at 15. Absolutely. That was a certainty I grew up with, and I believed it 100%. And so that was my childhood, this waiting to die. And then obviously I left home when I was 16, because if you weren't a Jehovah's Witness, you had to leave home.
Yeah.
And when I left home, sex, drugs and rock and roll, because I'm going to die. And I'm waiting for Armageddon, and Armageddon's going to come really soon. So I had to pack it in. I had to have the drugs. I had to sleep with that guy. I had to have it all because I was going to die.
Clock is ticking. I mean,
clock is ticking.
Yeah.
Might as well get hung for a sheep as a lamb. So I was like, have it.
This celestial edition of Countdown.
Absolutely. And by the time I'm 21, I'm absolutely fucked because the end hasn't come. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, can I stop this now? It's obviously not going to come, and I'm a wreck.
And what in that there's a very striking contradiction in the book. Well, not contradiction, but contrast, which is that your life, as you describe it, was a precarious one. Yes. It was full of uncertainty. And the title of the book, is captures that. It encapsulates that. Which is you're never quite sure whether what was coming around the corner was going to be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yes.
So on one front, day to day, moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, you are not sure what's coming.
Yes.
But there's a dead stop at the end of this of total infernal uncertainty.
Yes.
Now, even someone of the most robust psychology would struggle with that. It must have been extraordinarily hard.
It was. I mean, my father wouldn't spend any money on us because he wanted to go home. And my mother had like 7 or 8 jobs to make ends meet and feed us and him. And we never knew if we were going to eat. We just never knew. You'd come home from school, there might be dinner, there might not be. Usually wasn't. We didn't know on Sundays if my dad wasn't working, he might cook, he might not. So food was very hit and miss. We didn't eat for a couple of days. Sometimes I went to hospital when I was about 7 because I was malnourished. I was very ill all the time. We had, terrible childhood in that way, physically, cold, always cold. Then good things might happen. So if it was bad, it was spontaneous. If it was bad, it was unpredictable. You didn't know if you were going to eat. If it was good, you didn't know if it was going to happen. So there might be food. And if there was food, there would be bountiful, lots of it. And my mother probably was bipolar. Thinking back to some of her bizarre behaviour, for example, one entire summer she made my brother wear lederhosen for no reason. And then another summer, another summer she bought a Davy Crockett hat and a mouth organ, and she spent the whole summer sitting on the back step learning to play Beautiful Dreamer. She never fed us. She never looked after us. That was a whole summer. And you just took it, we would say they're both mad. And we'd say that to each other as a way of being in therapy with one another, being in solidarity with one another, helping one another get through this. We knew it was bizarre. At the time, we knew it was bizarre. We knew it was not right. We knew we weren't looked after properly, and we would talk about it amongst ourselves. And we would mock them mercilessly for their beliefs.
And meanwhile, you're a young woman of colour, of Irish ancestry, at a time when racism is, extremely powerful, and in urban settings especially, and there is a lot of social antagonism towards Irish people. Yes. The troubles are raging. It's reached the mainland. I mean, that must have been an additional extrinsic pressure.
Yes, we were brought up as Irish children. My mother had 9 brothers and sisters. We lived in the Irish community in Birmingham. So my identity was as an Irish person, but obviously I'm the only black person at the Irish Community Centre. My grandmother had 2 nanas. We called them nanas. I had white nana and black nana, and that's what we called them. And white nana hated us because we were black. This was not part of her plan. So I had a big, strong Irish identity. I thought I was an Irish child, even though I wasn't accepted by my grandmother. And then we had black nana, who despised us for being half white. She didn't like white people. And we weren't accepted by her and some of the black community. So we had that sort of going on in our family, but outside, so when I left school, my own surname is O'Loughlin. So Miss O'Loughlin goes for a job interview. They are not expecting a black person. And they go, are you Mandy O'Loughlin? Yes, I am. Oh yeah, the job's gone. I mean, right in your face. They didn't try and hide it. Not even a remote bit. And in 1974, when I was 14, the Birmingham pub bombings happened. And I went to school, and people didn't know I was Irish at school. It was just Brummie accent, black Brummie. I hear what people think about Irish people. Like people speak about Muslims today, terrorists, dirty, should be shot, should be put in prison, why are they here anyway, blah, blah, blah. And all of this is being said to me because people feel confident saying it to me because they will never guess that I'm Irish. So the racism and the exclusion was a very powerful thing. Fortunately, one of the things about my mad mother was that she told us every day we were beautiful and wonderful and great. And we never internalised it. We just thought, that's idiots for you.
Not indefinitely, by definition.
Totally. We just thought it never went in.
Yeah.
We always thought that was wrong and that didn't apply to us and we were fine.
Sure.
So fortunately, we didn't internalise it because I think people underestimate the damage that's done to the victim of racism, even when it's not said to me, to you. Like no one called me dirty Irish because no one knew, but I knew. Yeah. I could internalise it without a strong call.
I don't want to give away, in a way, what's the final epiphany in the book, but just hinting at it, you're a committals clerk, right? Yes. And a prosecutor gives you I'm not sure he realises quite how great a gift it is, and I'm not sure how much you want to talk about it because it is, I guess, a spoiler. But suffice it to say, it has something to do with the world of letters and yes. Writing. Did you have any intimation before then? Because you'd been in deep crisis before
yes.
then. That might be the exit door, the way out
yes.
to something new.
No,
any sense at all?
None at all. I was desperate. If he'd have told me to play golf, I'd have played golf.
Right.
If he'd have said to me, it's flower arranging, that'll save your life, that's what I would have done. I would have been the best flower arranger. I was just so desperate to not be in my own head that I would have done anything he said, just as, and if it hadn't worked, it would have been the next thing and the next thing. Fortunately, the thing that he suggests I do, which is read, is the most beautiful, wonderful thing, and it just strikes a chord with me immediately. So I didn't have to try golf, and I didn't have to try flower arranging, because I found my thing immediately, and it was just wonderful. It's great.
You describe it very beautifully. Adam, I'm interested too in the kind of, as I said, the move from, you become almost an expat from the world of medicine in the book, you know, and you describe often, you know, very humorously and very self-deprecatingly your own, you know, mishaps, minor illnesses, problems, you know, and the difficulty of being a, you know, professional doctor who's going to see other professional doctors, but having to get used to your changed status. You have been demobilized. You are now a patient. What was that like, and what did it do to your sort of self-esteem and your sense of what was still then a germinating new identity?
I avoided most of this by going to the doctor as little as possible.
Yeah,
and I think
even in Las Vegas.
Yeah, so in Las Vegas, I was staying in the Trump International Hotel.
Pre-presidency. We should make it very clear.
Now it sounds like I was staying at the Hitler Hilton or something. Yeah. But at the time, he was just this sort of weird reality bastard.
With a cat on his head.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was walking down the corridor of the 35th floor, and my right leg completely stopped working, and I collapsed to the ground. And I hadn't forgotten all of my medicine. I remembered that's probably bad. And so I dispatched my...
It is like riding a bike, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I dispatched my then boyfriend, now husband, to reception to get a wheelchair, because he was just standing there screaming, which was slightly unhelpful.
So logical.
Yeah, no, I could see where it was coming from. And so I worked out that it was probably just a disc issue, and that would probably be fine, but it would need an operation. And I'd only just arrived on holiday, and I wasn't going to ruin, like, you know, the next fortnight, 10 days, whatever it was. And so I decided I would get this seen to on the other side of Gatwick Express. Yeah. And there was another slight issue, which was I hadn't got any travel insurance. But But so I decided that was the plan, and so James pushed me round resentfully for the rest of the holiday, and then I got back to the UK, had an MRI, and then the surgeon said, you know, we need to operate now, and I was like, oh right, okay, and I said, I can't have made this any worse by waiting, can I? And he was like, well, the important thing is we're getting it sorted, because doctors aren't allowed to say things like, yes, you've obviously made it worse, you fucking idiot. So
although, of course, being a doctor, you knew that's exactly what he was thinking.
It was exactly what he was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I'm not great, you know, I wasn't great at that. I talk in agonising detail about a bladder stone in the book, and various other things that happened to me. But doctors don't like going to see doctors, because you're trained to be a bit infallible. If you're ill at work, then you either come in or you arrange your own cover. It's embarrassing. Getting ill, I was brought up in a family where my dad was a doctor. I got like, I don't think I had...
It was a GP.
It was a GP. I got, I think, half an hour maximum off school total over the years. I've got a scar, you can probably just see it there on my forehead, from a quite ham-fisted childhood head injury repair. Had I needed dialysis at any point, you'd have given it a bloody good bash. It was like, you didn't, doctors weren't part of... Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Sort of. And...
Delivery dialysis.
Exactly. So that was just, and so when I struggled mentally, when I was having PTSD, you know, or some form of that from you know, a terrible incident at work that saw me eventually leaving, of course I wasn't going to see a doctor, because it had been beaten into me through my childhood, through my medical education, through my time as a doctor, that you don't go and see doctors. And going to seek help for your mind is so much bigger than going to seek help for your, you know, for your spine.
Because the nightmares you talk about seem to me to be I mean, again, you described them with great wit, but they are. They seem to. They make total sense to me. Of course, an incident like that would haunt you, and there's a sort of sadness in the fact that there was clearly no structure for help. That you're expected to operate. I mean, everyone accepts that those in the medical profession have to have a degree of emotional detachment, otherwise they would go insane. I mean, that seems to me a part of from their patients. You can't become mates with your patients, otherwise you really wouldn't be able to do right by them. But that extends into a expectation of stoicism, which is inhuman.
Yes.
And that causes, as it did for you, real harm. And I wonder what the way out is. We've established that Zumba is a necessary but not sufficient cause of the solution.
So I think the first stage in resolving a problem, whatever it is acknowledging the problem, and that has to be admitting that doctors do struggle. When This Is Going to Hurt came out, the first book, I got so many messages from junior doctors who'd read, me being quite frank and open about how I felt after this extremely bad day at the office, and saying, until I read that, I thought I was the first doctor who'd ever cried in a locker room. But the truth is that most doctors find themselves crying in that locker room. But the fact no one talks about it makes it hugely isolating. How do we fix it? We need to sort out recruitment to medical school. That needs to be recruiting the best communicators, and it needs to be recruiting people who best represent the communities that they'll be looking after, not just keeping it posh. And it needs to be being hugely honest with them about what the bad days at work look like. I think everyone applying to medical school should have to read, a copy of This Is Going to Hurt, and not just for financial reasons. I think that you need to.
Very good review.
I didn't, or any of the other books like it. You sort of have to go into the job with your eyes open. Then I think at medical school they need to teach you how to deal with the bad stuff, and then when you're a doctor, you need to look after yourself, and you need to look after your colleagues. There are a lot of consultants who still insist on being called, Dr. Jones, Dr. Smith, Dr. whoever, by their junior colleagues. And truthfully, are you going to be able to say to your consultant, I'm really not doing well at the moment, if you can't even use their first name? It should feel like a team where you can go out for a bowl of pasta and say when you're struggling. And there need to be the systems in the hospital. There needs to be the standard protocol for when a bad thing happens, where you can be offered, would you like to speak to someone? Would you like a bit of counselling? Would you like a bit of time off? You might say, no, I'm fine, but just the fact that they're even thinking of it would make a difference. There's so much that can be done. It all feels quite basic, and things are getting better. I went to medical school in 1998, which was a long time ago, and I speak to a lot of medical students now and newly qualified doctors, and things are better, but just not near enough or far enough. Yeah.
Would it affect your promotion if you were somebody that went for counselling or something? Are you going to be seen as a sort of, can't quite cut it?
I don't think so, but you think that it will.
Yeah.
You sort of have the expectation that if you go and speak to occupational health, the first thing that will happen is they will phone the Secretary of State for Health and say that you're a dangerous liability. You just have that feeling.
It's coffee and tell them that you're dangerous. Yeah. Wow. She should call.
There are helplines and charities that are available to doctors, and I speak
but
to
you're
some of the people
describing
who
a culture. You're not talking about. You're talking about a cultural shift, aren't you? Not just.
Yeah, it needs a cultural shift. But I hear from these helplines and these charities and these organisations that something they hear again and again and again is that they're afraid to talk about it at work. Yeah. And I'd like to think that it would have no actual truthful impact, but
yeah.
It's interesting reading both of the books together, and it made me think of a word that had become a big irritant to me, and I think it's time we reclaimed it, which is aspiration, which is there isn't enough of it, and that which is demanded of young people is often of the wrong sort, which is that you are put in, to use Pete Seeger's timeless phrase, into little boxes, right? And I just wanted to ask both of you what you thought about that, because we're living in a world now where a lot of, first of all, because of longevity, probably most of us will do more than one thing.
Yeah.
So the old idea of, finding a job and then doing it till you retire and then conveniently dying quite quickly, that's gone, thank goodness. And that's a good thing. But it does mean that we'll have to probably do more than one thing. And secondly, that technology and automation and AI are going to mean that all sorts of human activities are rendered redundant anyway. So
Can't wait.
It's going to be great. I mean,
as soon as they can write books.
It really won't take long. But which is why I go back to this whole question of aspiration and what we expect of ourselves and of young people when we are, ourselves when we're young, and of young people but we have influence over. Kit, I just wondered if writing the book had made you think about that.
I think it's always good for anybody to be able to see themselves in literature. So if you see somebody, I think Adam and I were talking before, and Adam was saying that he misses certain things about being a doctor. And I think what he's done is made himself vulnerable. He said, this was shit. I didn't deal with it well. This is how I went on to do this. This happened to me. It wasn't great. He makes himself vulnerable so that other people in a similar situation, maybe not even in medicine, can look and go, God, I feel like that. And the whole point of literature, if there is a point to it, is so that we feel less alone. And I think when I write about my childhood, and my childhood was one of poverty and difficulty and great joy, it's always good if someone can read it and go, God, I was hungry. I know what that's like. And on the question of hunger today, food banks, children going to school who are really hungry, you cannot pay attention at school. When you're hungry, you sit there, you're tired because your body hasn't got the fuel that it needs as a child, and you're tired and you can't work well, and so your life chances are diminished, your school chances, what you achieve at school, diminished. And so if a child or a parent or someone that's never experienced hunger can read that and go, God, so is there a child in my class that's hungry, and is that how it feels? It's always good as an education, but I think it's much more important that we are vulnerable on the page so that other people can go, that's me, that's helped me, I've been seen, and I'm not alone, even if there's no answer. And often there is no answer. You don't write a book thinking, here's the answer to the problem of being poverty, here's the answer to racism. You just say, this is it. Yeah. Other people have done it. And I think there's such a comfort in being seen and being heard, and to think you're not alone. And even if there's no answers, you've got that. I'm not alone in the world.
Adam, was there a world where you could have, as a teenager, aspired to be what you have become?
Ish. I don't have kids, but I understand the concept that people want the best for their kids. That makes sense to me. And for my parents, the best was a safe, sensible job. And the list was, doctor, lawyer, accountant, I guess civil servant at a push, accountant, there was various, architect maybe. And they wanted me to have, and also Jewish immigrant mentality, have a sensible career. And medicine was treated my dad very well. He devoted his life to it. He was good at it. He loved it. He had a great time. Why wouldn't he want his children to do that? And four of us, I was the eldest of four, and our degrees were medicine, law, medicine. That was just. I had, whereas James, who sat there, his dad worked in advertising, and he's eldest of four, producer, musician, producer. So it's like that was the best for. It doesn't mean that either were right or wrong, but I did, to be a doctor, and part of the reason is so that only posh people can be doctors. You have to have loads of extracurricular activities. So you have to
You have to play the cello.
play the cello. It doesn't have to. It could be the oboe, maybe.
Yes.
Or
It's
you could
flexible.
be good at, could be good at judo, chess, swimming. As long as you're really excellent at it, as long as you're a county champion.
Because God knows you need those in an A&E and on a busy Saturday night.
It's the most obvious way to choose it. And the other thing they do is they make sure you've done loads of work experience.
Yes.
Because there's no working class people have easy access to work experience. It's easy if your parents hang out with other doctors.
Yes.
Of course you can get and sit in with a surgeon. It's very difficult if the only doctor you've ever seen is the one you go to see for your inhaler. Anyway, so I had to do all of that. And as I was doing my saxophone lessons and enjoying them and sort of being, goodish at them, I thought, I could do this.
Yeah.
I'm all right at it. It's fun. It's, other people, they make me stand up on stage and other people, get some degree of joy from it. And I sort of basically suggested, I could take that route, and that was shut down quite quickly. And it's difficult, You've only got a certain amount of independence when you're 14, don't you?
Well,
it's
pretty much
basically
none.
None.
Yeah.
And so I followed. But look, medicine's the most amazing career.
Yeah.
And I do miss it. It is the most brilliant thing.
It's important, I think, to say that the opposite of what your book is. Your books is an attack on the medical profession.
Hopefully, they're a love letter to the profession.
They're a love letter to it. Yeah.
But they're not an invitation that everyone should be able to do. Because some people, there's any number of jobs that I can't do, and I just think if we. So there was the sliding doors version. Can I ask a question? Yeah. Sorry if this is because we're obviously sadly going into years where there will be a lot more children who are hungry and cold. Are there lifelong hangovers from that? Yeah.
I think there are. You never quite get over the feeling that you might be hungry again. So my fridge is an abomination in that there's so much food in there that I can't eat. I'm such a prepper, and I've got everything I could ever want. So it's not enough to have the meals that I might eat that week. What if someone came? No one's coming. What if someone came and they didn't eat that? I need to have that. And when my children were going, I say, obviously here's dinner, and they go, oh, I don't eat that. You don't eat that? I'll make you a completely new meal. Or my children knew that half an hour before dinner, they could get almost a complete meal out of me because I couldn't bear it if they said they were hungry. It was triggering for me. Obviously, this is my shit. They were fine. They were going to eat. They always going to eat. But I have a sort of panic inbuilt, like that. I've got two sisters who are very overweight because they haven't dealt with that as well. It's definitely scarring. And also, of course, you're missing out as a child on key formative years for education, for play, for friendships, for all the things that food, and it's not just food, it's access to food and it's the reliability of food. Obviously, we ate, we did eat, we didn't die. So, but it was not reliable. And so you had that sort of knee-jerk reaction. Food came into the house and you would just attack it because you knew it was not going to be there for 2 days. That spills over into other areas of your life. Of course, I don't trust systems. I don't trust, I'm quite an anarchist. And I'm fearless about advocating for children having access to food and having the reliability of food. Also, growing up as Jehovah's Witness, we didn't have Christmas, birthdays, Easter, bonfire night, anything, no celebrations whatsoever. So when I had children, they have birthdays and half birthdays. So 6 months after their birthday, they have a mini birthday. My kids don't give a shit about it. I am obsessed with it because I'm trying to have my birthday, my 9-year-old, my 10-year-old.
You take Christmas pretty bloody seriously.
It's ridiculous. And again, I would go shopping randomly and have a big bag of clothes and say to my daughter, who's a horsey girl, she doesn't like clothes particularly, she likes horses, and I'll go, there, it's Topshop, River Island, blah, 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 and she'd go, all right, Mum, I'll look at it later. And I bought the clothes for me.
Yeah.
I bought the clothes for what I didn't have. I'm trying to feed the child I didn't have. I'm trying to have my birthdays. That's gone. You know, that needs some therapy, obviously, down the road. I'm too old for therapy. But, you know,
Too old for therapy.
never too old for therapy. So it's all that sort of stays with you. That's a stain and a hangover, and I sort of know about it. And that's quite funny until that's actually not quite funny. You know, you're not dealing with it well. So, and for all the children that tonight are going to bed hungry and waking up to an empty cupboard tomorrow, thanks to many, many years of austerity and fucking bad management, they will have that. In 10 years, in 20 years, they will have the stain, they will have the behaviours that aren't necessarily healthy. Mine aren't that unhealthy, but it could easily spill over into very harmful behaviours that were going to affect themselves and other people.
I presume, if you're getting no energy in, how do you concentrate at school? How do you achieve and attain?
Yes, you can't, because you're obviously, you know, to eat is a sort of primal, you know, the most basic instinct is to stay alive. And so you're being told every day that something you need to stay alive is not happening. So you think about food and you think about survival, while the child next to you who had dinner is going, hands up, play, you know, happy, and you're not happy, you're miserable and you're tired and you're cold. And so you're in fight or flight mode, and the child, you know, people talk about resilience, which there's no word that fucks me off more when they say, oh, well, children are resilient. No, they're not resilient. They're just growing. They're just growing.
There's that same word, there's that same word in medicine.
Yes.
You need to be resilient, which sort of implies that it's your problem
fault
to deal with all the crap that's thrown at you.
Totally.
Not that the system
doesn't
rely on resilient people.
Because it defines resilience as a moral
condition
rather than an actual, you know, state which is fed by many things. I've held these great authors for too long. I'd love to bring people in the newsroom. Who would like to? Yes, Paul. Wait, if you can wait for the microphone.
Hi, thanks ever so much. My name's Paul Atherton. I would be really interested in both your approaches to the works that you've produced, because obviously it's incredibly emotive and internal, putting these words on paper and then sharing them with an audience to which you don't know how they're going to react. I'd be really interested in exploring why you decided to do it, and what you hope people get from reading the work.
I decided to do it because I had a bout of relentless flattery and hard cash. I was writing a different... it was great. There's not much I won't do for those two things. I was writing a different book, and I was approached by an editor, said, oh, I think you should write it, it'd be really good. I was going, no, I'm not interested. She made me an offer. I said, yeah, do you know what? I'm really interested in that. So I wrote it, and I really had no intention of ever writing a memoir. I wasn't scared of it. I was just, I'm a fiction writer. That's what I thought. So I wrote it really, and when I was writing it, I was very much like, well, there's that incident, and we've all done it. You've got 20 anecdotes maybe about your childhood, and you trot them out at dinner parties and they become sort of polished over the years, you know where the laughs are. And then you sit down to write your memoir, and actually you unpick the anecdote, and it's not an anecdote, it's a sad story, or it's a funny story, or whatever it is, but you have to now tell the truth about the anecdote that's become polished over 20 years. And it was a great joy. And it was not, you know, it was not cathartic or anything like that. I think I've dealt with that with my brothers and sisters, but it was lovely. It was lovely to get it down, and it was also sad. I felt sad for my parents. They're both dead. I'd never have written it if they'd been alive.
Adam.
My first book was accidental and political. So it came at the time of the last junior doctor strikes, and the government was saying they're being greedy, they want more money, and that was a lie. It was a strike about working conditions that was going to affect, they're having a contract imposed upon them that would affect patient safety, which is what doctors care about. And I went up to the Edinburgh Festival and I read for the first time from basically a shoebox of my diaries, and by strange luck, an editor came along and said, "How many more of these diaries have you got?" And turns out she was right, and there was a book in there. And I talked a bit before about people saying that helped me, and that was an amazing thing to read, and that was the most powerful thing that's happened from these books, much more than you've sold this many copies, or it's been, it's now available in Uruguay or something. That made it very meaningful, the idea that you might have helped someone through what's essentially a slightly frivolous art form, certainly compared to working on a labour ward. And in this new book, Kit, you spoke very beautifully about vulnerability. I think vulnerability and telling the truth are the same thing. I think unless you're being vulnerable, you're sort of lying to yourself. Yes. Everyone's vulnerable. You're sort of, by definition, you're holding something back. And I talk about in it some, as well as hopefully some funny bits, some stuff that's tough and doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot. I talk about, as well as leaving medicine, the problem there, I talk about an eating disorder. I talk about being assaulted. Those are both chapters that went in and out of the book about 20 times. And the thing that kept them in was the thought that if one person reads it and says, "Thank you, that's helped," then it was worth putting it in. And I'm so glad to, I'm sad that these people have suffered, of course, but I'm glad that people have got in touch to say, "I read that and now I've spoken to someone and I'm getting help." And that has taught me that it is good to be open and honest, and it's something I'm going to keep doing.
Bravo. I see the great Polly Curtis at the back.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Polly Curtis, formerly of Tortoise. I wanted to raise something with you, Adam. We talked about it briefly beforehand. Your book and your writing has done so much to share the inner culture of the NHS, and there's the most brilliant parts of our nation are in that, and there are some really kind of dark sides to it as well. And I wanted to raise one particular case that's been in the news recently, and it's the story of Merripy Mills and her daughter, Martha, who died in a hospital 14 months ago. And there are many reasons why she died. It was sepsis that wasn't treated properly. There are many things that contributed to that. But the central thing that Merripy talks about, and Merripy is a very good, dear old friend of Tortoise and was one of the launch editors here, is the breakdown of trust between patients and doctors. And actually, she had blind faith in the doctors. She would have done whatever they said because they had her daughter's life in their hands. But the doctors didn't trust her to share the information, and they weren't open about how serious it was. And they described her in notes as an anxious parent. And there was a real kind of breakdown in trust there. And I think all the things you've spoken about today around kind of the experience of the doctors, kind of like so much compassion there. But when you read Merripy's piece and heard about that case, kind of how did you understand it and explain it from your work as a doctor?
Thank you. I first heard about that story when I came down one morning and my husband was in tears at the kitchen table. I was like, what's happened? And he said, read this. And then 15 minutes later, I was in tears. It was beautifully written, but I think the saddest thing I've read in forever. And the story of a 13-year-old girl who had a bike accident, and handlebars from her bike sort of went in her tummy and she wasn't quite right. And she should have lived, and she didn't. And she knew something was wrong. Her mum knew something was wrong. And it was, you could see it coming as you read it. And it was, as you say, there were many issues there. And it was a failure of listening in lots of different ways. There were doctors who didn't listen to the patient, and that's always a mistake. I worked in obstetrics where the golden rule is listen to the mum, because they just know, and it's a negligent doctor who does. And there were doctors who didn't listen to their colleagues, and they didn't listen to like the early warning systems that were in place. So you hit this number on a score, and then you invite the intensive care unit to come along. And it seems that there were problems between the two departments, and there was some degree of bravado. And the doctors who were meant to be looking after thought they knew best and didn't need to phone for the cavalry, as if that was more important than this poor child. And things have to get better in lots of ways, but I think if there are any doctors in here or any doctors watching this remotely, will recognise a certain type of dinosaur doctor who knows best, and they know better than the early warning system, and they know better than their colleagues, particularly the junior ones who have to call them Professor this or Doctor that, and they know better than the critical care department, and they know better than the patient, and they don't. And hopefully that type of doctor is retiring off and away, and hopefully big lessons can be learned. And it was an absolutely devastating read, and it wasn't an attack on doctors, and it wasn't an attack on the NHS. It was a rightful attack on this terrible set of circumstances, and my heart goes out to your friend, and she wrote about it beautifully. And I think it was so widely read, and I heard her talking about it in other media, and I hope it makes a difference, because it has to.
We've reached the end of the time. I'm going to take one more question. Yes, sir.
Let me call you Dr. K.
Call me Adam, go.
Adam, I just wanted to say, I think that what you've done for the medical profession is remarkable. And over the years, things have changed. So I want to just bring a little bit of optimism to the evening, because in fact, what has happened is that people recognize that actually the doctor on the pedestal, the arrogance, all these things have got to go, and they're beginning to go. And your work with doctor groups, medical students, and so on. And I want to raise the issue about an organization called Doctors in Distress. And I'm sure you're fully aware of that. This is an organization that has recognized that there are increased numbers of doctors who are committing suicide every year. And the underlining reversal of this is about, as you say, communication. And I think the medical profession is learning about it and is engaging with group therapy for themselves so that they can take their inadequacies and their failures. And I looked at the issue that was the most challenging to you in terms of the labour room, is that if there were better avenues to take the frustration and the anger and all of that, you might still be there. But on the other hand, what you've done has been very, very important. So I think that, we can look optimistically to say the medical profession has been changing. The patients are making it change. The story from Merope, which was really soul-destroying but beautifully told, does help people to recognize they have a voice. And I think that the doctors have to have a voice, the patients need a voice, and I think that this is going to come.
Thank you for your very kind words and for your optimism. And you're right, things are improving. And I am aware of Doctors in Distress, and I've in fact worked with them a bit. And I'll just tell you a quick and optimistic thing if I've got 2 minutes. So I had the huge privilege earlier this year of adapting This Is Going to Hurt for television. And it wasn't the most natural adaptation of a book. And I decided that should be focused on the mental health of healthcare staff. And the character of Adam isn't me, it's a very different person, but he becomes me in one, this is quite a major spoiler, so stop listening now if you've not seen it. the character of Adam speaks to a GMC tribunal. He's up in front of the beak and says the fact that every 3 weeks, one doctor in the United Kingdom, this small island, takes their life. And that's unforgivable and it's awful. And there's a memorial scene where a fictional junior doctor has taken her life, and a tree is planted and a plaque is installed. And I got messages on Twitter from people saying, "Oh, I saw that was at Ealing Hospital." They recognised the architectural beauty of Ealing Hospital and wandered around looking for the tree and the plaque. And they said I couldn't find it. And then I felt stupid and thought, oh, of course it's just a prop. But it was just a prop, and it did come home with the camera crew, but it wasn't stupid. And so we got in touch with Ealing Hospital, and we planted a real tree. And Anne and Amandeep from Doctors in Distress came alongside the Laura Hyde Foundation and various other, dignitaries and stakeholders in the idea of, improving the mental health. And we planted a tree, and now other hospitals have been in touch. And I was down in Truro not long ago planting another tree, and I will go wherever I'm invited and I will plant trees. And a tree doesn't make any difference in itself, but it means we're acknowledging that this is, because until that tree in Ealing Hospital, there was no memorial in the UK to healthcare workers who've taken their lives. Such was the degree of stigma and shame. And as you say, communication, the first stage is actually talking about it.
Thank you so much. What a great note to end on of optimism and of recognition. It's been a wonderful evening for me, and thank you so much to our two wonderful authors who've made it wonderful, and to all of you for joining in. I wish we could go on longer. Alas, the flag is up and we have to stop. But do join me in thanking the Mighty Kit and the Mighty Adam. And get the books.